From steroid scandals to lawsuits, from in-ring deaths to leaked photos, these are the darkest WWE scandals that changed the industry forever. Starting with the scandal that brought down the most powerful man in wrestling. For decades, Vince McMahon was untouchable. He survived steroid trials, controversies, and countless backstage incidents. But in 2022, everything came crashing down when reports surfaced that Vince had secretly paid over $12 million to 4 different women over a 16-year period. These payments were made to cover up allegations of inappropriate conduct, and they were kept completely off WWE's official books. The biggest known payment was $7.5 million to a former WWE contractor who claimed Vince coerced her into a relationship before pushing her out of the company. Another $3 million went to a former paralegal he allegedly had an affair with. The SEC launched a federal investigation, and by 2024, they charged McMahon for failing to disclose nearly $15 million in company-related expenses. Vince settled by paying a $400,000 fine and reimbursing WWE $1.3 million. However, the situation got even worse. In January 2024, former WWE employee Janel Grant filed a lawsuit with disturbing allegations. She claimed that Vince and executive John Laurinaitis exploited her and treated her like property, passing her around to help recruit other talent, and all the incidents occurred right inside WWE headquarters. She also claimed the company tried to silence her with non-disclosure agreements, and the fallout was catastrophic. Vince was forced to resign from TKO, effectively ending his decades-long control over the wrestling empire he built. The man who created WrestleMania and turned wrestling into a billion-dollar business was pushed out of his own company due to dark accusations that finally ended his reign of power. But Vince's legal troubles weren't new. 3 decades earlier, he faced charges that could have destroyed WWE entirely. In the early 1990s, the federal government came after Vince McMahon with serious accusations that threatened to send him to prison for over a decade. He was charged with allegedly distributing steroids to his wrestlers to make them look bigger and more marketable. If convicted and given the maximum sentence, Vince was looking at 11 years behind bars and a $1.5 million fine. This wasn't just about Vince's finances. It was about WWE's survival. If the chairman went to prison, the company would most likely collapse. The trial became a media spectacle. Hulk Hogan, WWE's biggest star at the time, was called to testify under oath. Another wrestler named Nails testified that McMahon had actively pressured him to take steroids, though many believed he was exaggerating due to personal issues with Vince. Despite the damning testimony, the jury found Vince not guilty, shocking everyone who thought the chairman was certainly getting convicted. WWE immediately announced a wellness policy with drug testing, but it was weak and poorly enforced. Fast forward to 2007, and the steroid issue came back to haunt WWE again. The U.S. Congress demanded WWE present documents about their drug policies and threatened federal intervention. Although no charges came from this investigation, the pressure forced Vince to finally implement a legit wellness policy, and WWE shifted toward the family-friendly PG era to rehabilitate their image. But speaking of WWE's wild antics in the early 2000s, nothing exemplified it more than one infamous flight from England. In May 2002, WWE had just finished the Insurrection pay-per-view in the UK and chartered a plane to bring the entire roster back to the United States. What should have been a routine 7-hour flight turned into absolute chaos that would become infamous for all the wrong reasons. One of the most dangerous incidents involved Curt Hennig and Brock Lesnar. The two got into a fight in the aisle of the plane, throwing punches and grappling dangerously close to the emergency exit door. Multiple wrestlers, including Triple H, Finlay, and Paul Heyman, had to physically intervene to separate them before someone got seriously hurt or worse, breached the door mid-flight. Hennig was fired shortly after the incident, but that wasn't even the craziest part of the day. Road agent Michael Hayes and JBL got into a physical altercation that ended with Hayes getting his signature mullet cut off by X-Pac. Scott Hall was also terminated after becoming extremely intoxicated and making crude comments to flight attendants. Dustin Rhodes allegedly serenaded his ex-wife Terry, who was also on the flight, making everyone uncomfortable. The whole incident became known as the plane ride from hell, and it forced WWE to completely overhaul their backstage policies and behavior standards for wrestlers during travel. But from backstage chaos to in-ring tragedy, few moments in wrestling history are as heartbreaking as what happened on May 23, 1999. Owen Hart was one of the most beloved wrestlers of the 90s, but on that night at the Over the Edge pay-per-view in Kansas City, everything went tragically wrong. Owen was scheduled to make a comedic entrance as his Blue Blazer character, being lowered from the arena rafters down into the ring. It was meant to be a light-hearted moment, poking fun at rival WCW's Sting's entrance. But the quick-release mechanism on his safety harness malfunctioned and triggered way too early. Owen fell nearly 80 feet, hitting the top rope chest first before crashing onto the mat. The live crowd initially thought it was part of the show, but as medical personnel rushed to the ring and attempted to revive Owen, the horrifying reality set in. Owen was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead from internal bleeding. He was just 34 years old, in the prime of his career, and had a wife and 2 young children at home. What made the tragedy even more controversial was WWE's decision to continue the pay-per-view. Despite one of their performers dying in the ring early in the broadcast, Vince McMahon made the call to keep going. Announcer Jim Ross had to inform viewers at home of Owen's passing while the show continued around them. Fans in attendance were confused and angry, many not finding out what actually happened until later. Wrestlers were visibly shaken. Owen's widow, Martha Hart, was rightfully furious. She sued WWE for negligence, arguing that the dangerous stunt was unnecessary and poorly executed. Martha has remained highly critical of WWE ever since, refusing to allow the company to use Owen's name for years. But if Owen Hart's death was wrestling's darkest in-ring moment, what happened in June 2007 shook the industry like never before. Chris Benoit was one of the most respected technical wrestlers in the world. His 20-year career had taken him from Japan to WCW to WWE, where he finally achieved his dream by winning the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 20. Benoit was known for his intensity, his work ethic, and his dedication to the craft, which is why what happened next was so incomprehensible. On June 24, 2007, Benoit was scheduled to appear at WWE Vengeance to face CM Punk for the ECW Championship. But he no-showed the event, which was completely out of character for someone as reliable as Benoit. WWE officials and his friends in the locker room immediately knew something was wrong. When police arrived at Benoit's home, they discovered a scene that would horrify the world. Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son Daniel were all deceased. At first, authorities thought they might be looking at a home invasion or some kind of external attack. But as the investigation continued, the dark truth emerged. Chris Benoit had taken the lives of his wife and young son before ending his own life over the course of a weekend. The wrestling world was absolutely devastated. Fans wondered how someone who seemed so dedicated and professional could do something so horrible. The answer came months later when doctors examined Benoit's brain. Decades of unprotected chair shots to the head, diving headbutts, and countless concussions had literally destroyed his brain tissue. Benoit had severe CTE. His brain showed damage consistent with someone in their 80s suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease. WWE erased Benoit from its history completely. Video packages stopped mentioning him, his matches were pulled from highlight reels, and his name disappeared from WWE forever. The company faced massive criticism for their concussion protocols and how they'd allowed wrestlers to compete with head injuries for years. The tragedy forced huge changes across the entire wrestling industry. The number of chair shots to the head dropped dramatically, and certain moves like Benoit's diving headbutt were essentially banned. The Chris Benoit tragedy remains the most horrifying chapter in professional wrestling history, a reminder that the toll of this business goes far beyond what fans see on television. But switching gears from the Benoit incident, let's talk about how one of WWE's biggest female stars was pushed out of the company for falling in love with the wrong person. Chyna was a revolutionary who broke every barrier for women in wrestling. She was a founding member of DX, a former Intercontinental Champion, and one of the most popular stars of the Attitude Era. But her WWE career came to a crushing end because of a love triangle that destroyed her personally and professionally. Chyna and Triple H started dating in the late 1990s, while both were rising stars in WWE. They were one of wrestling's power couples, both on-screen and off. But according to multiple sources, everything fell apart when Triple H allegedly began a relationship with Stephanie McMahon while still with Chyna. The situation was messy, painful, and happened right under everyone's nose in WWE. Chyna's sister later revealed in interviews that the breakup devastated her. She said that Triple H and Chyna had disagreements about starting a family, with Triple H wanting children and Chyna not ready for that step. Chyna also struggled with substance issues and mental health problems that complicated everything. But the real betrayal came when she tried to address the situation with Vince McMahon directly. According to reports, Chyna confronted Vince about what had happened between Triple H and Stephanie. But instead of supporting her or at least staying neutral, Vince essentially told her not to make trouble about it. When her contract came up for renewal in 2001, WWE simply chose not to renegotiate. She was released from the company unceremoniously after everything she'd done to help build the Attitude Era. The aftermath was tragic as Chyna struggled for years after leaving WWE, dealing with financial problems, addiction issues, and feeling betrayed by the company she'd dedicated her life to. She passed away in 2016 at just 45 years old. Triple H and Stephanie went on to get married and eventually take over WWE together, running the company after Vince's departure. For years, WWE refused to induct Chyna into the Hall of Fame, with Triple H awkwardly having to explain why during interviews. However, this wasn't the only scandal Triple H was part of. In May 1996, at a house show in Madison Square Garden, 4 of WWE's biggest stars did something that was absolutely forbidden. They destroyed kayfabe, the unspoken agreement that wrestling's rivalries and storylines were real, right in front of a live audience. The 4 men involved were Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Triple H. In real life, they were best friends known as The Clique, a backstage group with booking influence in WWE. But on TV, they were presented as bitter rivals. They were never supposed to acknowledge their real friendship publicly. But this particular night was special. It was the final WWE appearance for Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, who were leaving for WCW. After their matches ended, all 4 men gathered in the ring and shared an emotional group embrace as the MSG crowd looked on in confusion. They were openly showing that the rivalries were fake. Unlike today's social media age, where wrestlers air their entire lives on TikTok, in 1996, this was a massive deal. WWE and all wrestling promotions worked extremely hard to maintain kayfabe, to keep fans believing that what they saw on TV was real. Wrestlers who were enemies on screen would literally avoid being seen together in public. The business was built on this illusion, and the Clique had just shattered it in one of wrestling's most famous venues. Vince McMahon was absolutely furious when he found out, but he couldn't really punish everyone involved. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were already gone to WCW. Shawn Michaels was WWE's top star and champion. That left only Triple H to take the fall for all of them. The game was buried as punishment, losing matches and momentum. The plan had been for him to win the King of the Ring tournament in June 1996, which would have given him a major push toward main event status. Instead, WWE gave that spot to Stone Cold Steve Austin, who delivered his famous Austin 3:16 promo and launched the character that would define the Attitude Era. The curtain call looked like a career-killing mistake for Triple H at the time, but it accidentally created the biggest star in wrestling history. Sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures. But speaking of the McMahon family and controversial relationships, let's talk about wrestling's biggest backstage gossip from the 90s. Randy Savage was one of the biggest stars during the 80s and early 90s. But in 1994, Savage suddenly left WWE for WCW, and something strange happened. He never came back. Even after WCW closed in 2001 and WWE bought their tape library and contracts, Savage never returned. He wasn't acknowledged on WWE television, he wasn't invited back for appearances, and most suspiciously, he wasn't inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame despite clearly deserving it. Other legends like Hogan and even Bret Hart eventually reconciled with WWE, but not Randy Savage, and fans demanded to know why. The official explanation was that Vince took it personally when Savage jumped to WCW, viewing it as a betrayal. But many fans didn't buy that. This started the backstage rumor that Randy Savage had an inappropriate relationship with Stephanie McMahon in the early 1990s after Savage divorced Miss Elizabeth. Vince found out about it, and that's the real reason Savage was essentially blacklisted from WWE for the rest of his life. What added fuel to this conspiracy theory was an incident in 2004. Triple H, who was married to Stephanie by then, made some disparaging comments about Randy Savage during a promo. Savage responded by posting videos online where he made suggestive remarks that seemed to hint at their alleged past. To this day, nobody from WWE or the McMahon family has ever directly addressed this scandal, but it'll always remain one of the most controversial backstage stories in wrestling history. And speaking of wrestling history, check out this video next to relive the entire history of pro wrestling from the 19th century to the present day.